Conflicts, crop failures, drought, and a host of other factors have brought possible famine to millions of Africans. Relief agencies estimate more people in Africa are now at risk of disease or death due to food insecurity than at any time since the Second World War. Several regions have been hit hard, but the famines are most pronounced in Nigeria, South Sudan, and Somalia. Now, for those at risk, time obviously in short supply. Now, for some perspective on the size and scope of this developing humanitarian crisis, we are joined in Washington by Salem Solomon, a respected journalist at VOA's Africa division, along with VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young, who's been laser focused on the underlying causes of this crisis. My thanks to both of you for joining us. We need a little bit of explanation, perhaps tell the world just the scope and the size of this problem. Salem, how large is this developing crisis? How many people are affected?
19 countries across the continent of Africa have been affected by this. 20 million people. We're talking about countries northeastern Nigeria. When we say Nigeria is affected by this, we have to be very careful about this because Nigeria is the most fertile country, but it's specific places like Adamawa, Yobe, and Borno State that are affected, and this is because conflict and, of course, lack of access to humanitarian efforts on the ground. South Sudan, similar to that.
So I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit more on some of the human impact of the crisis that's developing there. But I want to get Jeffrey Young into this conversation. You've done some deep backgrounding on this whole issue, and you're saying, aside from the natural causes, this is a problem that's been made worse by a lot of the underlying political and ethnic factors that seem to affect some of these countries. Can you explain that to our viewers?
Governmental, political, and ethnic factors. And we can look at it country by country. You look at South Sudan, you have basically a fight to the death between Riek Machar, who is a Nuer, and Salva Kiir, the president, who is a Dinka. And each side has a faction, and the two factions are literally fighting for total control of South Sudan and its riches.
And what is this doing to the people?
They're caught in the middle. As this conflict is going back and forth, you have people starving in the middle, people who cannot be accessed because of conflict or because of remoteness, because of a number of factors. You have a situation where it has been very difficult for NGOs, for aid agencies to get into the country. Sometimes they've been allowed in, other times, in South Sudan's instance, they have actually imposed prohibitive fees for NGOs to enter the country as a way of trying to dissuade them. And the big factor is that Salva Kiir and his faction is definitely, according to many qualified sources, using food as a weapon.
And Salem, I'm wondering if you agree with Jeffrey's take on this. Are some of the causes largely man-made?
Yes, definitely, especially in South Sudan, as Jeffrey just explained. South Sudan right now is the country that famine has been declared there. Another thing on the humanitarian impact that you mentioned earlier, another thing to focus is second, third countries that are around it. For instance, Uganda is now accepting or allowing South Sudanese refugees to come in. It's playing host to 800,000 refugees coming in. The most vulnerable people are affected here, children being force-fed, women giving birth in IDP camps, internally displaced people in camps that have no assistance of any sort.
And I think when I look at some of these pictures, Helen, most heartbreaking is the fact that nearly half of the victims are children under the age of 5.
That's right. I mean, most of the time, in times of conflict, the most vulnerable are affected. Same in Somalia. Our correspondent from the Somali service just came back this week. He has witnessed an 80-year-old man crying, breaking down. You see the level of desperation. Women giving birth in these places. We're talking about 6.2 million people, half of the population affected by this. So this is very severe. It's on the verge of famine. It's very important to specify the difference between famine and drought, because by the time a country declares famine, it means that you have to help. There's no way out of it.
And Jeffrey, you saw the wall-to-wall coverage when those Syrian children were killed by the chemical weapons attack in Syria. Shouldn't this issue be getting wall-to-wall coverage as well? Shouldn't this be leading the newscast?
The human tragedy is immense. The thing of it is, in order for the story to get out, people have to be able to get in. Many of these are very difficult, almost non-permissive environments. When you're dealing with Somalia, al-Shabaab creates a non-permissive environment. In other words, news crews can't really roam around freely in Somalia and file stories to show you how bad things are. Northeastern Nigeria, in Borno, in the areas around that, Boko Haram, you're not going to be able to get a press pass and walk in and cover this story, because you're dealing with, as they say in the military, non-permissive environments. And this is one of the reasons why this is not able to be brought to the public's attention as much as Syria, where, yes, you do have a conflict zone, but people are filing stories.
Salem, you've been trying to get this story out there to more people. Tell me about the efforts that you and others are trying to do to get the message out there that these people need help.
You know, our role as a journalist is of course to convey the message and desperation that people are dealing with on the ground. Some of the footages that we've been sharing and showing have gotten some sort of response. The role of the diaspora, I mean the African diaspora, is very important. In 2011, 260,000 people died in Somalia. But you know, that also brings remittance issues in Somalia.
I'm quickly running out of time, but Jeffrey, 10 seconds. Is there any reason for hope?
There's a reason for hope when you have good governance, when you have external agencies like the African Union that stand up and take a position and hold to it.
Thank you so much to both of you, Jeffrey and Salem, and to all of our correspondents. That is our show for today. We'll be back next week for another edition of The Correspondents. In the meantime, do stay up to date with the latest news from around the world at voanews.com. You can also catch up on all of our shows there. Click on the Watch tab on the upper right of the VOA website. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. Thanks for watching. I'm Millar Sega, and for now, so long from Washington.